to talk about taming the wild, using product development as a risk management strategy. If you want to get, everybody always asks, can I get a copy of the slides? Yeah, if you scan that QR code or type that URL in, you can get a copy of the slides and some bonus information. And there's also a handout if you want to take some notes and do some any follow-up information. So that is there for you. So today, what I want to talk about, and I'm just going to go over the agenda really quick, so that gives you another chance to get a copy of the handout there at that QR code. We're going to talk about risk for product development from a standpoint of a framework for risk. And then we'll talk about 4 specific risk factors to help look at strategy, product development, and the systems you use. And then we're going to talk about a couple of really short case studies of how those different factors impact which process you select, because those risk factors are related to your strategy. And then we'll wrap up, and hopefully we'll just be this half hour like we have agreed. So what does risk mean to you? And you can type in chat or you can come off mute. I'm okay with that. And tell me what risk means to you.
Exploration of an idea.
Exploration, I like that one, yeah. Maybe it's getting up really early on a Saturday morning for a conference. Negative business impact, yeah.
Chance that a bad thing could happen to your business.
A bad thing, yeah. Losing, yeah, losing. We usually think of risk as kind of failure things, and we're worried about losing money, losing reputation, losing market share. So when I think about unknown, I love that one. Thanks, Jim. Uncertainty, exploring the what ifs. Yeah, for sure. Those are all ways that we think about risk. So I like to think about risk for product development from 2 perspectives. One is technical uncertainty, meaning I don't know how to do something. And the other one is requirements uncertainty, meaning I don't know what to do. So if I take those at the low technical uncertainty and low requirements uncertainty, meaning I know what I want to do and I know how to do it, I would call that a simple project. And we often use traditional waterfall, staged and gate product development processes for those simple projects. It does not mean that they cannot be very, very sophisticated. So building a refinery is a very sophisticated project, but you know what you want to do and how to do it. So you can use a waterfall methodology. At the opposite end of the spectrum, when we think about high levels of technical uncertainty, we don't know what we want to, how to do it, and requirements uncertainty, we don't know how to do it. That's really exploratory R&D. And we apply the traditional scientific method to that. And that might be, in my mind, the purest sense of agile project management, because we propose a hypothesis, we do some incremental work, we check if our hypothesis is true or not, we iterate and propose another hypothesis, et cetera. So at those opposite ends of the spectrum, we really have waterfall and agile processes, depending on what problem we're trying to solve. In between, where we have complicated or complex projects, that's where we run into these new product development hybrid processes. And that's also where our strategic approach to business and our strategic approach to risk really matters. So let's talk about what those strategic risks are in product development. And you guys might, feel free to type in chat if you identify more, but I think we can boil risk in product development from a strategic perspective down to about 4 elements. One is the customer or the market, the finance or the business opportunities and the strength of our own business, the technical, or technological approach, and then the people and the teams that we use for product development. IT and regulatory risks, for sure. Those are also risks. Absolutely. Thanks, Eleanor. So I'm going to take us into the Wayback Machine and go to the turn of the 20th century. And we run into a guy named Richard Sears, who decided he wanted to sell anything to anyone with home delivery. And so that was his strategy for the business. So how does he approach product development? So Richard Sears starts with the customer. Richard Sears worked for a railroad as a telegraph operator, and he recognized there were other telegraph operators just like him that wanted gold-filled pocket watches. 70% of the United States of America was rural at the time of 1886 when he founded his company. And so it was really hard for a telegraph operator to go to a store and pick up a pocket watch. And if you did manage to go to a store and find a pocket watch, they were about $25. Remember, this is the 20th century. At the time, 1 ounce of gold was worth $1. Today, 1 ounce of gold is worth something like closer to $1,500, $2,000. It fluctuates. So think about how much value that was to them. So he said, I wonder if there's a way that I can sell pocket watches to other telegraph operators. So he came up with this idea that he could mail pocket watches and sell them to other telegraph operators. Because remember, 70% of the country was rural. So he thought about, how can I do this profitably? So he thought about the finances. Again, it's $25 to go to the store to buy a pocket watch. And he found a partner named Alva Roebuck, who was a watch manufacturer in Indiana who could manufacture a watch for $12. So Richard Sears says, gee, if I can sell them for $14, I can get a $2 profit. So by teaming up, by identifying the customer and understanding the risk there, looking at the finances that he could have, teaming up with Mr. Roebuck, and then they address the technical issues later on of selling anything to anyone, anywhere with home delivery through the catalog and then eventually through retail stores. And we can talk about the demise of Sears Roebuck later, but this was really a really novel way to approach the problem of not only product development, but a business model of delivering strategically to customers, selling anything to anyone with home delivery. So let's jump forward 100 years. And I think that strategy of selling anything to anyone with home delivery might sound familiar. We have a company today called Amazon that sells anything to anyone, anywhere with home delivery and all kinds of other options to that. But Jeff Bezos attacked this strategy using those same 4 risk factors, but with a little bit different approach. He looked at this and said, you know what, there's this new thing called the internet. I wonder how I can exploit the internet to sell anything to anyone, anywhere with home delivery. So he said, there's the internet. And he looked at benefiting from using his working capital and not having warehousing. So the customers he first approached were, of course, people that bought books. I have a ton of books, and that's still the #1 thing I buy from Amazon is books. But he approached this from the financial perspective of saying, I can sell somebody a book, then I can buy the book and ship it to them, and I don't have to have inventory. I don't have to have all that working capital. So he devised a really awesome financial model around the technical solution of selling anything to anyone, anywhere. And then he built a very sophisticated technical team that can run a lot of tests and do iterations. And the technical team for Amazon and the warehouse management is truly amazing to sell anything to anyone, anywhere with home delivery. So we have 2 examples of companies that had the same strategy, but use these risk factors in a different way. When we get to the end of the presentation, I'm going to show you 2 companies that have different approaches in each of these risk factors and end up with different ways to develop products because they have different strategies. If they did not have different approaches to risk, they would have perhaps the same strategy like Richard Sears and Jeff Bezos of Sears Roebuck and Amazon. So when we think about that first risk factor of the customer, you have to ask, do I really know my customer? And I may not have, some of you guys might see some gaps here on how to get to know your customer. But when I think about getting to know my customer, I think about getting those requirements for design. And I think about if I get my requirements for my customer up front, I have low requirements uncertainty, I know what I want to do, then I can get closer to that waterfall type of process. If I have low requirements uncertainty, or excuse me, high requirements uncertainty, high certainty of requirements, I don't know exactly what to do for that customer, then I'm closer to the hybrid and agile processes. So some of the questions I might ask to understand my customer, and from a strategic business perspective, I might ask, how am I going to sell products to my customers? What markets am I going to participate in? Will I sell from a wholesale perspective? Will I sell retail products? Will my customers come to me online or through a catalog like Sears and Amazon? Or do I represent a brick and mortar like Sears, which eventually was their downfall, was the allegiance to the brick and mortar model? Do I have global customers, or am I focused on local products? Do I have low touch sales, or do I have a high touch sales cycle? So those are some of the risk factors I think about for customer, and I'm sure some of you guys might think of some others, and feel free to type those into chat. And as you're doing that, I'll move on to risk factor number 2, which is financial risk. We saw that Richard Sears looked at providing a low-cost product versus the existing high-cost product, trying to get to that high-volume, low-margin business, whereas Jeff Bezos looked at it also from maintaining working capital and not having to maintain a lot of inventory costs like his traditional competitors of Barnes & Noble and Borders. So from a financial perspective, we look at risk factors just like Sears and Amazon did. Are we competing with a low price, high volume product, or are we looking at a premium differentiated product for which we can command a high margin? Both of those are money-making propositions, but you really have to understand that strategy before you start to design products and to design your systems to support products. Another thing to think about today is really the strength of your supply chain. Are you doing in-house manufacturing? And these all tie together, but if you're doing in-house manufacturing, when we talk about technical risks, that gives you some ideas of how to develop that technology. Are you importing and relabeling products? Even when I go to craft shows, I see, jewelry that's made in China and it's just been relabeled to, Jane's earring store. So that's one way, and that gets you into that thin margin, low price, high volume technology and strategic approach. Another arena is inventory management. We saw that with Jeff Bezos, and we to some degree saw that with Richard Sears. We saw the inventory management is really important. And we talked about that risk factor when we talked about customer risk factors of what's the distribution. And then what's your overall business strength? I think we all saw that the parent company of Google and the parent company of Facebook took huge hits in the stock market this week. That they have the technology, the money, the investment behind them to survive. But if you're a small company and you took a 20% hit on your stock price, what is your response to that? What's the overall strength of your business? And that leads to what kind of products you develop. It also leads to what kind of strategic approach you have to product development. Okay, risk factor number 3. And again, this ties back to the financial position as well. Are you developing products to also not only serve your customer, but also to own the intellectual property? A lot of companies have very sophisticated R&D groups, and creating patents and the ability to license and then make money off of the license is a side benefit and a side profit stream to actually developing products in-house. So that is an important technical question from a strategic standpoint. You may also license your R&D in, having somebody else develop that technology. So as you're thinking about technical risk factors, you want to think about questions like, do I make or buy my products? Do I make or buy the whole thing, or do I make or buy certain pieces? Do I hold technology for certain key elements or components of that product? And then a really big strategic question is evaluating cost versus quality versus speed to market. Those, of course, tie to the strategic questions and risk factors that you're asking about the customer, and you're asking about finance as well. If you are very focused on speed to market, don't care so much about your quality, you're looking at a low cost product, you're in that low profit margin arena. So you can address a lot of those strategic questions following some of the elements that you probably already have thought about from a customer standpoint, from a technical standpoint, from a financial standpoint. And the last element I want to talk about, I've called it teams. And it's as much the people as your teams. And this one has, this is like a 3-hour, 3-day talk. I know some of you go through dealing with your organizational teams on a regular basis. So I'm sure we could have a lengthy conversation. But I think as you're approaching your strategic product development, how are you designing that system? You want to think about the team maturity. Do they have the skills and capabilities that are refined for product development? Have they been doing this for a while, or are they new to product development? One that is huge, and I think I've spent 11 months working with one client talking about trust. This is really, does the team have internal trust to execute the work? And does leadership have trust of that team to allow for learning and for risk taking? A very low risk tolerance gets you more to having to get those risk factors to low requirements uncertainty, and low technical uncertainty leads you more to a waterfall process to execute against your strategy. When you have higher degrees of trust, you're going to probably allow more iteration, more learning, more development, and you're going to be in either the agile or usually more of a hybrid process for product development. Autonomy is very important to teams. Before we started, Miriam and Cheryl and I were having a little discussion about working remotely. As we have more folks working remotely, we need to think about the autonomy of those teams. Who's looking over their shoulder and making decisions, or are you allowing, from a risk perspective and from a customer perspective and a finance perspective and a technical perspective, to let those teams work within those boundary conditions and allow them to develop products as they see fit? And then culture is huge. It's very hard to change a company's culture, but this is reflected from our values, our standards, our routines. How do we create efficient new product development teams that support the strategy and can address the risks that we've identified? So that is huge, huge importance. And so these things on teams, so just to put a plug in for the PDMA annual conference in Orlando in 2 weeks, since this is a PDMA co-sponsored event, these are the steps that are in the PDMA body of knowledge. And I think that's one of the prizes today, as well as a PDMA body of knowledge and membership. These are the steps that you go through to build an efficient new product development team, and we can talk about that separately. So I want you to get your questions ready because we're here for a short time today. So go ahead and think about what questions you have from the standpoint of a risk framework and from risk factors like customer, finance, technical, and the people or the team. So get your questions ready. And as you're getting your questions ready, I'm going to wrap up with a couple of different approaches that some of my clients have used for developing products, evaluating the differences in these risk factors and their different strategies. Remember, Sears and Amazon have the same strategy. They approach the risk factors a little differently. Sears looked at the customer first. Amazon looked at the technology first, but ultimately they had the same strategy. In this case, we're looking at that middle part of the framework that we talked about, where requirements uncertainty or technical uncertainty is high, but usually not both of them. And so I have a comparison here of a nonprofit publishing company that also does events and a kitchen appliance manufacturer operating in basically a low price point. So the risk factors of the customer lead them to different processes, and it's because they have very different strategies. In the case of the nonprofit publishing company, they know their customers very, very well. They interact with their customers on a regular basis. They have lead user groups that they talk to some of their customers on a weekly basis. The kitchen appliance manufacturer does not know their customers very well. They know the big box retailers, they know Costco, they know Walmart, they know Target, but they don't know you and me that are that use their products as an end user. So their approaches to those risk factors are based upon their different strategies, which leads them to different product development processes. The same is true of the financial perspective. You would think a nonprofit might be always struggling with finances, but based on the size of the team and their strategy, their goals, their business objectives, they're doing pretty well from a financial perspective. The kitchen appliance manufacturer, just like Google or Meta and Alphabet, also had a 20% loss over third quarter. So finances are tough, especially for consumer goods right now. And as we're I think Bloomberg said 100% headed into a recession. So finances are tough for a lot of companies that have consumer goods. From a technical perspective, the nonprofit publishing company uses plug and play software. They're not developing a lot of technologies themselves because their primary product is more of a service from publishing, and they don't have to be developing new technology. Their content is what they're really selling as a product, and that's what differentiates them. So they're in good shape on technology. The kitchen appliance manufacturer does some technology development, also outsources a lot of technology development. So a lot of different perspective there from that particular risk factor. And then project teams. The publishing company is a pretty small group of folks, and they are working remotely, but they have good relationships. They trust one another. Management trusts them. The CEO doesn't get in their business too much, but she does check on them to make sure that their things are progressing within the boundaries, the costs of projects that they have, the expected revenues that they have. Kitchen appliance manufacturer, I mentioned trust has been an issue for a while. The management team is becoming, because of their financial condition, is becoming more and more risk intolerant, risk averse, meaning then that they want to check every, what is the saying, cross every T, dot every I from the teams. And so their trust of the teams to do work is degrading. And so I don't give them a very high score on project teams. They also have really large teams that are based on consensus, and really large teams have a hard time getting to consensus. So decision-making is pretty slow. But these are their strategies, and the processes that are selected to fit their strategies based upon these risk factors seem to kind of work. So the nonprofit publishing company is focused on new innovation. They have evaluated their risk factors and chose a agile product development process. Again, having some requirements uncertainty and some technical uncertainty. The kitchen appliance manufacturer, very focused on cost efficiency. So a lean process where you can eliminate as many stages and gates as possible from a waterfall process. The trust factor doesn't get you all the way to agile. So a lean process, removing waste, building cost efficiency is really good for them. So those different strategies come from looking at the risk factors, which then go to feeding your different NPD processes. So some more information, again, you can download the slides and bonus information. There's a QR code there for you. If you want to learn more about these processes, the strategic approaches, I have an online course starting in January of 2023. If you register with that QR code before November 30th, you can save $50. I think it's still a pretty good bargain at $197 minus the $50. And I'd love to connect with you on LinkedIn. There's my LinkedIn QR code. the description of WAGIL is also in the Innovation Answer book. So you can get a copy of that on Amazon, of course, because they sell anything to anyone, anywhere, at any time.